your English is going to become. Now, one thing you do always have to be wary of is this idea of reciprocation. Every time you ask somebody a question, right, there's always a chance they're going to flip it right back at you and ask the how about you question, right? So if I ask them, so whereabouts in Sydney do you live, right? And they say, oh yeah, I live up at Bankstown or something like that. They might immediately respond with, how about you, where do you live, right? So it's generally a good idea to try to choose topics that you can talk about as well, right? Try to choose things where, you know, if I'm talking about their job, I'm going to be very aware that they might ask me about my job as well. It's always good to prepare a couple of topics that you can talk about, nice, simple, straightforward ones that, you know, come up normally when you talk to strangers or when you're introducing yourself, right? So just remember, every conversation is a two-way street, right? One thing I like to do is if they flip a conversation on me, if I'm feeling a little bit lazy, right, I'm going to look for an opportunity where I can just flip around again and ask them another question. Okay, make it seem natural, of course, don't force it, right? You should always have a little bit of what we call conversation ammo in your pocket. So basically things you can talk about in case they're the ones questioning you. But you don't want to let them question you for too long, because the worst thing that can happen is if they ask you a question which you don't really know how to answer and you end up having a big, long, awkward pause. So the faster you take control of the situation, the less likely that's going to happen. So here are some of the things that, you know, we normally talk about very often. So I guess this is my version of the pickup line topics. So work is probably the number one thing, right? When you meet a stranger, it's always easy to talk or complain about work. That's super easy. People you know, right? If there's any kind of people who you both know, that's usually an easy topic to get onto. Where you live in Sydney is kind of boring, but obviously that's something you can talk about, and of course just your local area in general. Food and restaurants, everyone loves food, no problems. Or you can of course talk about your family as well. Yeah, so these types of things are common topics which generally everybody is happy to share a little bit about. Yeah. Outside of that though, right, if they mention something that you just happen to enjoy, that's an easy way to get into it, right? So for example, if you're just talking and they randomly mention some kind of sports like NBA or basketball, feel free to just jump on that topic and just ask, oh, do you watch a lot of that? Who's your favorite players? Who's your favorite teams? And stuff like that. You might find out that you have an easy shared topic with them, right? So basically spend most of your time asking questions and listening to them, right? You want to listen to find out more details. The more you know about the person you're speaking to, the easier it is to find things to talk about in general. All right. Now, of course, when we're talking about conversations, right, there's a lot of individual techniques that you might consider, things that make you better as a conversationalist. Right. So this first idea is this idea of inclusive language. So when you talk about things, right, you want to try to include other people in the conversation, right? One of the things I tell people is that you don't want to say the word I too much, right? You remember how I told you guys earlier that everyone loves to listen to themselves talk. Everyone loves to talk about their own life. One of the things that gets really boring very quickly is if you meet a person who's just talking about themselves all day. I think this, I love that, I went to this place, I went to that place, right? The problem with this is that if you're only talking about yourself, then you might as well just be talking to yourself as well without that kind of interaction. It's almost like there's a wall between you and everybody else, right? So generally, if you want to engage people more and to give them a positive type of reaction to you, you want to make sure that you're including everybody in the conversation. So this is where you can simply substitute the word I with a we in the conversation, right? So, for example, right, instead of saying, I think this, I might say, we all think this, right? You know what I mean? Right? I try to include everyone in the conversation. Even when I'm giving you guys a speech tonight, right, I try to use inclusive language. Every now and then, I'm going to sneak in a very quick question like, you know what I mean? right? Just to kind of get you guys to respond a little bit. It's a very common language technique, but it makes your speech a lot more interesting, right? So maybe I'm talking about my work, right? And I might say something like, oh, my work is so tough, it's so tiring. And you know, my boss, he's always bothering me. You know what I mean? Right? Of course they know what you mean. But the point is, if I say something like that, it feels like I'm trying to bring them into the conversation. It feels like I'm asking, how about your boss? Right? Does he have that same kind of problem? Do you experience the same issues as I do? Right? And it gets them thinking, and maybe they will just voluntarily say, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Right? So try using that kind of thing. Try to address people directly. Right? Ask people things like, what do you think? Or what would you do in this kind of situation? And stuff like that. Right? Ask people for advice. That makes you sound like you're being very personal. Right? So in other words, your goal is to try to get them to respond to you as much as possible. Right? Now, if you're a little bit higher level, right, you can actually bait them into asking questions as well. So once you get a little bit higher level and you feel a little bit more confident in your speech, this is where you can start tricking other people into asking you questions, right, where you deliberately leave out information. So for example, one of the very simple tricks that I teach people is, imagine if I want to get someone kind of really engaged and interested in what I'm saying. I'm going to say, hey, guess what? You know what? Last night, the craziest thing happened to me. Crazy. Now, if I said something like that, what's the first thing in your mind? What's the first thing you think about? You're probably all thinking, whoa, something crazy happened. What happened, right? They're going to ask you what happened if you don't immediately say it. This is how you include someone else in your conversation again, right? You get them to start asking you questions. You get them to start actually having an interaction with you. Okay, so you want to look at different strategies for getting people involved. The second thing, another very good strategy that you can use, and one that's very, very commonly used in dating and picking up people, is to give people choices, right? To give people questions that make them think, that seem kind of fun. So for example, if you're at a restaurant with a stranger, what can you say? You might say something like, what do you think I should get? Do you think the beef looks better or the chicken? That's an example of a choice, right? Because whenever you ask somebody about a choice, they always have an option to give their opinion, right? And again, this can reveal information about them, and it makes them feel like you're very interested in what they're talking about, right? You can ask random questions, like, for example, if you're at a party, right? What would you rather do, right? Would you rather be the one hosting the party, or would you rather go to someone else's party? That might be an interesting question for you to consider, right? If you are going somewhere, like if you're on a trip with someone, you might ask them, should we drive there or should we walk? Right? These are, again, right, these are very simple questions which people are asking all the time, right? And that makes someone feel valued. And this is where, if they make a choice, you can always ask them, why do you say that? What's the reason, right? What's your opinion on this particular thing? And that's when you can get them started with the conversation as well, right? So if you guys are doing some kind of activity together, look for opportunities to give people choices. Another very easy way to get a conversation started.